Hello, everybody, and welcome to Sidebar with me, JT. First off, thank you to all our 13th jurors for supporting us over the past 2.5, 3 months. It both feels like 100 years and a day at the same time. So thank you very much. Also, this is going to come out on the 4th of July, so happy 4th of July. In fact, it is the 4th of July right now, and here I am at 2 a.m. Ta-da! Well, let's hop right on into this. So today, we are going to be talking about Victor Ernest Hoffman, the Shell Lake murders, and mental health in Canada. And while I don't exactly advocate in the past for my public speaking students to start with a quote, well, I'm going to, because of course, I'm the teacher. I can do whatever I want, right? Anyways, this is a really good quote from Glen. What mental health needs is more sunlight, more candor, and more unashamed conversation. And I think that this case today is actually a really good vehicle for talking about mental health. Now, mental health has always been a fascination of mine. As someone who suffers from anxiety and depression and ADHD and insert thing here, the brain and mind is a terribly interesting part of our humanity. And in addition, the history of mental health is both horrifying and fascinating as well, and in my own opinion, is driven by a lack of understanding and fear of what might be contained within the mind. Now, the Shell Lake murders committed by Victor Ernest Hoffman sent me down a rabbit hole of mental health history. This is one of those cases that as I go through this moment in Saskatchewanian history, we will all get frustrated together. Why did this happen? What was the driving force behind it? Were the decisions made about Hoffman's mental health correct? Or were the decisions a product of the times? Could something like this happen today? Now, there are many different ways to start this discussion, but I think what I believe is the best way to begin is a brief history of mental health in general, and also in Canada. I think one of the important things to remember with this is that there really are no answers. Not one size fits all. There is no panacea to mental health. The Canadian Encyclopedia says there is, quote, no clear line that divides the mentally healthy from the mentally unhealthy. And in addition, the definition of mental health is relative and is dependent on cultural context. I think cultural, historical, I think as many different contexts as you can think of, that's what it's dependent on. Now, in the early years, mental health was defined as the absence of symptoms of mental illness. That, yes, that makes sense. Hippocrates was one of the first writers who challenged the belief that there were supernatural causes of mental illness. He claimed that mental disease was more physiological and natural than anything. But by the Middle Ages, attempts to explain mental illness went by the wayside, and scientific or philosophical theories about it were replaced by demonology and witchcraft because, explain something you don't really understand by something that can't be seen or understood. Oh, I guess we should be happy that it wasn't even worse, because it was indeed the Middle Ages. Remember, context is everything. Around the mid 1500s, Johann Weyer opposed attributing mental health disorders to possession by the devil. He said, no, that's not a thing. By Felicia, get out. And then in the late 1700s to early 1800s, Philippe Pinel was a prime reformer to advocate a humane approach to mental health patients. In 1714, Hotel Dieu in Quebec provided a ward for women who were mentally ill and, in addition, took about 12 men. Overall, care of the mentally ill was the responsibility of the family. Patients who could not be cared for were placed in jails and poorhouses, which you can only imagine had deplorable conditions. In 1835, asylums for the insane were opened in St. John, New Brunswick, and 1841 in Toronto. Changes in Canada were initiated by Dorothea Dix, Richard Buck, Charles Clark, Clifford Beers, and Clarence Hinks. There's a nice picture of an asylum. It looks so homey. And by picture, I mean artist rendering. How blocky. Anyways, Dr. Buck was appointed superintendent of the Asylum for the Insane in Hamilton in 1876. He believed mental illness was a, quote, failure of the biological process by which mankind adapts to change. And then Dr. Clark ceased to restrain inmates. He stopped that. And in 1893, he advocated that the term asylum be dropped as well. Dr. Clifford Beers and Dr. Clarence Hinks organized the Canadian National Committee for Mental Hygiene, which later became the Canadian Mental Health Association in 1918. In 1930, Dr. Hinks was one of the first physicians to recognize the value of prevention and of treating sufferers of mental illness before they were incapacitated. Psychologist Samuel Laycock, under the influence of Dr. Hinks, became professor of educational psychology in 1927 at the University of Saskatchewan and director of education for the Mental Hygiene Committee in 1929. Now, World War II began, and it affected attitudes towards mental health. Medical examinations of recruits revealed that thousands of healthy adults suffered mental difficulties. This changed the public's thoughts about mental health in a huge way and kicked off research into preventative measures and methods. This also created a better understanding of emotional needs of children and the role of stress in causing mental disorder. Mental health as a study and treatment is one of the newer sciences, relatively. Has it been discussed for a while? Sure. But it truly wasn't until World War II and the aftermath that it was deemed more than just what seemed to be a high school science project. So there's your quick timeline of mental health illness, both in general and in Canada. There is so much more to consider there. So I'm encouraging everyone to do some research and learn about it. There are a number of resources available regarding the case of the Shell Lake murders committed by Victor Hoffman. However, I have to say one of the best resources I found was by F.H. Kahan called Schizophrenia, Mass Murder, and the Law. Now, this seems like a generic paper. However, it does a deep dive into our case today. The Shell Lake murders took place in, you guessed it, Shell Lake, Saskatchewan, Canada. Now, while Saskatchewan is so much fun to say, I prefer Sassy Sketchy. And you can't stop me, so I'm not going to stop. Come for me. The Northern Saskatchewan Highway, the Sassy Sketchy Highway, brings one to Leask and joins up with another highway to Shell Lake. The villages around there were populated with primarily farm-based communities, and many folks who lived up there had lived there for years, and it was quite the community where everyone knew each other. Y'all, this town sounds almost idyllic. At least, it seemed like it was. Shell Lake specifically had around 250 people in it. There was one hotel, a cafe, and a beer parlor. There was a park, cabins, a beach, and a golf course. Now, I'm not sure what golf looked like back in the 1960s. I suppose it looked a lot like it did or does now. I mean, it couldn't get much whiter than it already is. Low-hanging fruit. Oh well. Here we are. In either case, my thought is that it must have been an amazing golf course because folks came from as far away as Saskatoon. Saskatoon. Why are Canadian towns and names and all that so much fun to say? Come on, America, get with it. Make it fun. Anyways, I'll tell you this. This is about where the happiness stops. Victor was born in 1946. Now, also in 1946, Dr. Spock's baby and childcare influences millions of new and expectant parents throughout the U.S. Strapless bras have become popular. Tide, the first detergent for automatic clothes washing machines, was introduced, along with the first electric clothes dryers. And suntan lotions, developed for troops during World War II, marketed to consumers for the first time. Where would we be without our suntan lotion? Probably like my dad, who in the heat of the Florida sun put on Crisco and grabbed some aluminum foil. Dems for the times. Were they? I don't know. You tell me. Anyways, In either case, Victor grew up in an ordinary family of devout Lutherans. Now, I'm going to assume that means there probably wasn't an electric clothes dryer or strapless bras. Just going to toss that out there. The Hoffman family practiced mixed farming, and they followed a routine of the seasons. They rarely took a holiday, and they did choose to keep Sundays holy. Mr. Hoffman, when speaking about the location, said, quote, "All here are our friends, everybody. We live in a nice district, and the people are very nice. We are well known here." As with many, many kids, Victor was good at what he did. He was responsible, a good farmer, and he worked hard. He walked at the age of 9 months and talked at the age of 10 months. He started school when he was 6, but repeated grades 3 and 9. He didn't drink or smoke. He had one close friend, but was mostly a loner, and he occasionally went to church to make his dad happy, which honestly is probably the story of most kids. His dad said, and keep in mind, this is the 60s, so the verbiage surrounding mental health was a tad different. So before you come for me, let it be known that the disclaimer has been made. Victor went right up to grade 9. Now, this is his dad talking. Victor went right up to grade 9. If anybody were on the mental side of life, he would not be able to take grade 9. The principal one day, well, something happened there, He started to play hooky when he got to be in grade 9, and I guess something was going wrong. The principal asked why Victor wasn't coming to school. We talked for a while, and the principal said Victor is no trouble. He is very good in school, and he'd have no trouble going right up to grade 12. But then something went wrong. His dad continued to explain how he wasn't, quote, mental from childhood like the detectives and police had said. He used the explanation that Victor was very good at putting in a crop. He did a great job, and he said that if something was wrong with him, he couldn't have done that. Personally, I don't think that necessarily does a good job explaining his mental health at the time, but it was important for his dad to talk about that, so we're going to let him have it, and that's why I mentioned it. Despite being able to plant a crop well, Victor's father said, quote, "But it went just like that. There were about 3 weeks when I knew there was something badly wrong. He got worse and worse, and finally we took him to Prince Albert. It was the first time we had taken him to the doctor for mental illness." Now, Prince Albert was Saski's third and largest sanatorium for the treatment of tuberculosis. It was opened on January 6, 1930. 5 years later, they reported that 7,591 people were treated or examined in order to combat the spread of the disease. The sanatorium was closed May 1961, despite objections from people in the city. Folks didn't understand why there were choices to keep other institutions over Prince Albert. I'm guessing somebody had a bad experience getting a Prince Albert. Ouch. But that's just me. The problem here is that it was known for treating northern residents. When Prince Albert closed down, the patients, of which were of primarily indigenous descent, were moved to Fort Qu'Appelle. I'm butchering that name, and I apologize. Fort Que? French makes your mouth do weird things. And I took 7 years of German. Super helpful, by the way. But that sanatorium is where those folks were taken, which made it even more difficult for families to visit them, because why not, right? Prince Albert was reused as North Park Center. Now, this was the Saski training school for the mentally handicapped from July 1961 until it was closed in February 1988. So with our timeline, it looks like this might have been where Victor was taken. So we heard mostly from Victor's father in regards to what brought them to take Victor to Prince Albert. However, despite their confidence that Victor was, quote, okay up until that time, the reality was that Victor was schizophrenic most of his life. You see, Victor told doctors at the facility he was in that by 6 he saw the devil. He said the creature was 6 feet tall, black as night, and with a long tail. He started feeling he was in the middle of a battle of seduction between the devil and God. He said he would hear tapping sounds that went faster and faster. By the age of 10, he had strange daily impulses to kill. He never told his parents about this, and he got away with this because he directed his impulses against animals. Which I would say, tale as old as time. He once caught a cat by accident and chose to toss it in the smokehouse. The cat was left in there for weeks, but then Victor decided to let it go because he felt bad for it. Perhaps it was because the cat being left alone in a dark place reminded him of a certain someone he knew. Of course, despite this, he clubbed cats, he stomped on them, and he also killed dogs. He said killing animals made him happy. He moved on to people when he started beating up a young boy and continued to beat him. And then he killed all the local squirrels, hundreds of them. Victor continued hearing the devil, seeing disembodied cold hands floating across the room, and felt them touching him. He also had the devil helping him pick berries. Victor also saw angels as well. He said that one guardian angel tried to protect him and told him many times that he must not kill crows. Once, when the devil attacked her, Victor found himself with a sword and he was attacking another smaller angel. In addition, Victor liked to steal guns and ammunition. He broke into a store in order to do so. However, he was caught and spent a day in jail. And the devil continued to come to him and asked him to sell his soul. At one point, Victor's mom caught him shooting his gun up in the air a couple times. When she approached him and asked what he was doing, he said, quote, "I shot the devil." Victor took the car and drove away for a while, which is a great idea. But while he was gone, his family hid all of the weapons in the house. When he got back, he wanted to speak to the pastor. His mother overheard him saying that he would like to kill her. Needless to say, the next day he was committed to Saskatchewan Hospital at North Battleford, which you can see here. Here's where the story really goes off the rails, and it is indicative of the mental health treatment style in Canada in the 1960s. I was not impressed. Honestly, I think even today, no matter what country you're in, it's still pretty hit or miss. Y'all, a psychiatrist determined Victor was in a state of acute schizophrenic reaction who needed to be hospitalized. After talking about some of the items he had been going through, Victor signed himself in as a voluntary admission and was admitted May 29th, 1967. So, what were some of Victor's symptoms and behaviors? Well, he talked to himself. He laughed when he was alone. He was concerned whether he was a boy or a girl. God had told him he would go to heaven. He had stomach cramps and burning sensations. He was preoccupied with sex, masturbated every day, fatigued and weak, sleepless with no remorse. Now, some of these things on the list, product of the time. Other things, he's a kid. So, what are you going to do? However, talking to himself, laughing when he's alone, sometimes that could be. It doesn't matter. At this point, this is what they had listed as some of his symptoms and behaviors. Now, Victor also had visions and feelings that put a lot of what we've heard in the past to shame. He said he felt he was somebody else. He told doctors the devil put another brain in his body. It was, quote, a special kind of punishment for refusing to sell him his soul. He believed the brain in his skull belonged to someone named Denise. He said he was able to touch the devil and angels, and that he once tore off the blouse of an angel. Shame, 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 Victor. Bottom line, TLDR, he was diagnosed with schizophrenic disorder, chronic and with uncontrolled symptoms and severe social handicaps. What was the solution? The solution was a series of 12 electroconvulsive therapy sessions, tranquilizers, occupational therapy, and supportive psychotherapy. I don't know if you know much about electroconvulsive therapy. I only knew as much as what I saw in the Asylum series of American Horror Story or Nurse Ratched. But let's just do a quick timeline, shall we? In the late 1930s, ECT was invented in Italy. They thought inducing seizures could relieve symptoms of mental illness. In 1940, news about the technique spread, and ECT was first used in North America and Europe in the 1940s. It proved to be effective for a variety of neurological and psychiatric conditions, including major depression. In 1944, Vladimir Lieberson shortened stimulus duration. 1952, Holmberg and Thesleff pioneered the, quote, modified ECT, anesthetized, which further improved patient comfort. They finally decided to anesthetize patients during ECT. From the late 1930s to 1952, patients were receiving electroconvulsive therapy without anesthesia. In the 1960s and then some, ECT was also used as a, quote, treatment for homosexuality, which was then considered an illness. The use of ECT in this did not last because there was no evidence that it altered anyone's sexuality. And to that I say, no kidding. Now, today, research in this field continues. There are newer approaches being used, like repetitive transcranial magnetic stimulation. This is showing promise in extending the benefits. 8 decades after its discovery, ECT continues to be of benefit in the treatment of severe and refractory affective and psychotic disorders. Well, after that, don't we all feel better? No? Bueller. So Victor went through a series of ECT treatments with other supportive treatments in addition to that. I guess there is something to be said for some other treatments being applied as well as, electricity. After 9 ECT sessions, he was more cooperative and sociable. I mean, at a certain point, you have to wonder if this was because of the ECT sessions or because he was just ready to be done with them. He eventually got to the point where there wasn't much change, but his dad thought he was back to his normal self, which I don't know if that's much of an improvement. I mean, he still believed the Black Devil was with him. Quote, later he said that for the previous 2 days, he had concluded that all his ideas about the devil were only his imagination. In his belief, he had never been so clear in his mind and thought he was ready to go home and enjoy life better, because now he was not scared at all. He said he was free of the devil, but also said killing was on his mind. He thought about killing his brothers, his parents, sisters, and classmates at school. And he told a patient he was going to kill someone, but he had no reason to do this. Get this, though. Quote, the hospital psychiatrist called Mr. Hoffman in one day and told him that Victor was schizophrenic, but was not, quote, too bad. Mr. Hoffman did not know the meaning of the word schizophrenic or schizophrenia, except that it meant a mental disorder where a patient has difficulty controlling his mind. He later looked the word up in the dictionary. So much for educating patients and patients' family. Now, I'd call this a failure to communicate. The doctor, in addition, said that would be just as good as ever, or Victor would be just as good as ever in a year or two. Year or two. Despite this, Victor was discharged on July 26, 1967, to his father, who knew nothing about schizophrenia, with a prescription for tranquilizers. No sooner had he got him, but Victor complained about the pills giving him a backache. From the not surprised files, he soon stopped taking those tranquilizers, so he was released in July 26th, and stopped taking medication around August 8th. His father said he had far more pills than he should have had left, so it was probably as soon as he got back that he stopped taking them. Victor came home knowing that something was going to happen. He knew things were coming to a fork in the road. Would he take the high road or the murder road? I mean, I think we know the spoiler already, seeing as I'm covering him on Sidebar. So, the timeline. August 14th, 1967. Victor was on the tractor and it was a quiet day. He lay down on the sofa around 9:30 p.m. and he fell asleep. August 15th, 1967. He woke up at 3 a.m. and went outside to pee. He came back inside, tried to go back to sleep. He failed, and then he started imagining things. He then went to the garage. He saw a dog and he wanted to kill it, but he didn't. He worked in the garage, and when he couldn't work any longer, he paced up and down. He had a strange feeling on the right side of his head. He said it was like his entire body had been cut in half. It was like pleasure and a powerful impulse to kill came over him. He thought about killing his parents. That's not the first time, but he decided against that. He put gas in the car, loaded his .22 rifle, put it in the back, and drove off. Like one does. A mile from home, he saw a hawk and had an impulse to kill it, but he didn't. If you have an impulse to kill whatever you come across, in fact, let me redo that. Jeff Foxworthy. If you have an impulse to kill whatever you come across, you might be a killer. And he decided he'd drive around for an hour and then go back home to do his chores. Looking for spruce to hunt squirrels, couldn't find any. Then the thought to kill people popped into his head. He saw many houses as he passed by them. He found a house that had nothing unusual about it, and he decided to stop and go in. So the murders took place August 15th, 1967. And that's what we're about to talk about right now. So if it might be too much, that's okay. You can always fast forward or wait for the next one. This is kind of going to be a theme throughout Sidebar. So he walked into the house and saw someone sitting on his bed. So they were sitting on their bed saying, "Who is it?" He kept saying that over and over. And when he saw the gun, he jumped on the bed and Victor shot him. Victor said, quote, "If he had talked quiet and told me I was wrong, it would have been all right. He could have helped me and I wouldn't have killed him, but he tried to stop me." Mr. Peterson, the person who he shot, jumped off the bed and attempted to stop Victor. Victor shot him. He grabbed Victor's neck and Victor continued to shoot him. Victor shot him at least 11 times. Victor said, "I was a little scared when I shot him, but I wasn't sorry." At this point, as you can imagine, the family wakes up to chaos. He said they looked like pigs and he had no respect for them at that point. And if you watched the trial with us about Joseph Zeeler, or watched a little bit of it anyways, the whole pigs thing seems to be a theme. 2 girls screamed and ducked under the covers, and he shot each of them. Then he heard Mrs. Peterson jump out the window. He went outside, and he shot her. She had the baby with her. He then went back into the house and shot the girls. They were, in his words, still screaming and making funny noises. They didn't die. The, quote, bullet in the head just didn't want to kill them. I didn't want to shoot them anywhere else. I wanted to shoot them in the head because I would cut the head off and take it with me. Then I'd have them bullets with me. I mean, I guess we should be grateful that he decided not to cut their heads off. He realized some of the bullets passed through, so he wouldn't have all the bullets, so that wasn't going to help him. I guess small blessings. Why did he kill them all? Well, he didn't want them to identify his license plates when he left. One girl, Phyllis, she was spared because she couldn't have identified him anyways. She hid between her 2 dead sisters in the bed under the covers. And as if it couldn't get any darker, quote, I'm going to add another trigger warning here. This deals with murder of a very small child. Quote, he heard the baby crying and went to the window and looked out. The baby was on the ground. The mother had fallen, and he asked himself what will happen to the baby. Then he shot it. He didn't want to shoot the baby. Quote, I hated myself for shooting it. I didn't want it to suffer. Maybe nobody would find it for 3 or 4 days. It would starve. He started looking for the cartridges. He shook out the blankets looking for them, picked up 17 and pocketed them. Then he took a jar full of shells and $7 from the wallets he found. Victor got home around 7:30 a.m., and his parents were up, and his dad asked him where he had been. He felt sick. His mother scolded him for getting up early and driving. And if only she knew. He milked the cows, but had a hard time due to the murders. He felt rotten. He didn't sleep well during those nights. His mom came over to him and let him know that she heard via telephone that there was a murder at Shell Lake. Are you all tired yet? In the words of Charlie Brown, good grief. Well, here comes the RCMP on their horses and carriages and their bugles. And that didn't happen. Just thought it'd be fun to show it. They came in 3 cars, but the other options sound a lot more entertaining. They took Victor's gun and boots. Police asked if he had ever been in Shell Lake, and he lied about it. Despite this, what Victor took away from all this is that the police talked nicely to him, like he was a human being. The police ended up arresting him that Friday night. They took him to they took him to the office in North Battleford and told him that they had the murder weapon. You see, despite his predilection for voices and looking towards violence, I think this ended up being a lot like a guy who wants to ride a roller coaster. He gets on a roller coaster, and then he realizes at the top he's afraid of heights and also gets motion sickness. Victor killed. He did it. He immediately got sick and horrified about it. Now, does that make it any better? No, absolutely not. He committed terrible atrocities against a family, eliminating all but 2 of the Petersons' nuclear family. He left one small child to be cared for by her older sister, who just so happened to be living in British Columbia at the time. Lucky? I don't know. It was determined that Victor was fit to stand trial. He stayed in Prince Albert Jail until the date of his preliminary trial on October 24th. Saskatchewan loves the Prince Albert. What is up with that? I know. Timing, timeline, history, later, previous. I understand. But it's a joke. And a little levity about now is helpful. At this time, you can imagine that a crime like this has made its way around the bend. The Hoffman family was in the spotlight. They began getting letters. Wonderful letters from Shell Lake. They were all sorry, and we didn't have one letter that had anything bad in it. This is from his dad. Only from the family of the family that was murdered. You can't blame them. The threatening letters from Shell Lake didn't bother me. I put myself in their place thinking about it. Maybe I'd have felt the same way as they did. But then you never can tell what people do. Whew. The trial of Victor Hoffman on 2 charges of non-capital murder opened January 8th, 1968 in the Court of Queen's Bench in North Battleford before Mr. Justice M.A. McPherson and a 12-man jury. That's not him. Yay, stock footage. Something about this case. Well, this entire case is horrifying and fascinating, and I think we've covered the horrifying. Where it gets fascinating is with the legal portion, as we 13th jurors know. Victor's lawyer, G.E. Noble, was quite the fella. He was in practice for 18 years when he got the case, appointed by Judge J.M. Policha. Noble said, quote, I think the first reaction was, well, how could you get involved? But I think that by and large, the public understands better now the role of the defense counsel, as understanding that what we do is not necessarily what we think or agree with. It is a question of giving your client a chance. We knew perfectly well that he had done it, and everybody else knew that he had done it. So they saw, when we raised the legal defense, really a kind of technical thing. That was what the defense counsel was for, as opposed to the kind that you see on TV, tricksters and shysters. If he only knew for how long defense counsels are going to be just battling that stereotype. Now, I don't know if this is still the case. At a certain point, the public may have understood that, but truly, as I said, don't we vilify the defense attorneys? Is it because of their job, who they represent, or the fact that we've just come across some super shystery folks in true crime or legal stories in general? Overall, the legal defense was put together, and it was absolutely brilliant. They did a great job being purposeful. There are a lot of ways that this could have gone wrong. However, they took the high road on a series of those things. And here's a lovely for instance. They could have called out Saskatchewan Hospital for letting Victor out when they had no right to. Noble knew that the hospital had, in his words, boobed. That's right, boobed. The late 60s and 70s. Yes. However, he also believed that one mistake should not sink a hospital, and because of this, he didn't feel it necessary to bludgeon the hospital. In fact, before this case, like everyone else, Noble didn't know much about psychiatry. It's no surprise there, really. What this did, though, is push him to figure out everything he could to grasp the concepts that were involved in this case. This also led him to want to work hard to make whomever was on the jury understand this as well. He said, quote, I thought that unless we got his illness across clearly and in some detail, we wouldn't overcome what I considered to be the danger, which was that people might say, we are fed up with these people being let out of the hospital and going around killing people. And we're going to say, in effect, the hell with it and convict him. In saying this, he knew he had to find some way to get the jury to know how sick Victor truly was, which I don't think there's any question that he was very, very sick. Noble knew that he needed to start by communicating that Victor was a man governed by his illness. He had lined up a solid set of experts, and their testimony was extremely helpful. There was one thing I wasn't a huge fan of, and that was his commentary on Victor's mom. Now, that being said, I also see where he's coming from. Noble said, quote, "They didn't comprehend it. It just never occurred to them, his family. Later, I put Mrs. Hoffman on the stand, and she was a beautiful witness because she was completely unsophisticated. I was trying to get incidents from her of very unusual behavior, and her evidence coming from this little unsophisticated Ukrainian lady with the high-strapped pumps and the blue socks, you couldn't imagine her telling a lie." Like I said, I totally get it. I just didn't exactly appreciate the way he characterized her. At some point during the trial, the defense put up a Dr. A. Monheim L. Malegi, M.A., diploma education, Ph.D., just kind of a cornucopia of degrees, who had a report called, quote, "The Phenomenal World of Mass Murder," dated October 2nd, 1967. Love to be his doctorate director. Ooh. He tested Victor using the EWI test. This is known as the Experiential World Inventory Test, which are done in retrospect to figure out how Hoffman felt the week he was discharged from the hospital. What was the conclusion? Well, I'm going to read this long form from the report in order for us to understand the entirety of the report. So bear with me. Victor, unaware of the basis for his inability to stabilize his phenomenal world and to maintain integrity of his body, condemned himself for being inadequate and mixed his present symptoms with his past failures and disappointments. He felt he was nothing and lost his self-respect. Mr. Hoffman is ravaged by rage and self-hatred and is therefore susceptible to episodes of agitation. He reacted to his paranoid ideas with anxiety and hostility. His hostility seemed to be directly linked to his anxiety and distorted perceptions. For example, people looked fierce and dangerous, and when they looked at him, he felt petrified. In addition, he felt weary of life, lonesome, abandoned, useless, and a burden to his family. He saw his past life as a mess. He had no hope and had thought of suicide. These were, however, counteracted by hostility directed against the world. In the end, the doctor thought Victor's improvement in the hospital prior to the murders was merely behavioral and nothing more. Via findlaw.com, the McNaughton Rule, or test, was started by the English House of Lords in the mid-19th century, and it states that, quote, "Every man is to be presumed to be sane, and that to establish a defense on the ground of insanity, it must be clearly proved that, at the time of the committing of the act, the party accused was laboring under such a defect of reason, from disease of mind, and not to know the nature and quality of the act he was doing, or if he did know it, that he did not know what he was doing was wrong." Now, the test focuses on whether a defendant knows the nature of their crime or knew right from wrong when it was committed. Now, in addition, Section 16 of the Criminal Code in Canadian law says, quote, "A person is insane when he is in a state of natural imbecility or has disease of the mind to an extent that renders him incapable of appreciating the nature and quality of an act or omission, or of knowing that an act or omission is wrong." If imbecility is key, well, it looks like I'll always be safe. Near the end of the trial, the jury deliberated for a whole 3.5 hours before they found Hoffman not guilty by reason of insanity. Also, the big question for the jury was not whether or not he was guilty, but if it was by insanity. Now, they questioned what would it mean for him to be institutionalized or placed in a prison for the rest of his life, which was most worth it. The defense did their job, one of the jury members said. Now, one of the jury members said this: "For the average person like myself, the only thing we can rely on is the information given to us by somebody like this. He was logical. I can recall when the doctor described the black devil that the boy saw. He made it so clear to everyone, or every one of us, that there wasn't any fooling about this. He did see this. He was compelled by this thing that he saw. The doctor got that message through to us exactly what the boy was thinking, that the boy was driven by something that was real. It was real. This is something that is hard for us to understand, but the doctor got to us. So, what happened post-trial? Well, in January 1968, Victor was placed in an institution for the criminally insane at Penetag. See, these are the names. These are the fun names that make me look silly. Penetagwishene, you know what? In Ontario, for an indefinite period. So he was put in an institution for an indefinite period. Mr. Hoffman said, quote, "If this illness happens again in our family, I will know how to deal with it. I'd go to an authority, a good doctor, and do the right thing for him to make sure this wouldn't happen again." Well, everybody, that is that's Sidebar. And that's the case of the Shell Lake murders, Victor Ernest Hoffman, and, a brief history of mental health in Canada. I want to thank you so much for tuning in. Hopefully this provided you a little material to kind of feed on while you're waiting for next week so that our normal schedule can resume. And I know you miss Brandi. I miss her too. Also, make sure you go to 13th Juror on Twitter. There you'll find a link to our link tree, which will provide you all things 13th Juror. You can save it to your home screen like a little app. We also now have a Discord called the Jury Room. You can check that out as well. That link will be up on our link tree soon, and we will be sharing it throughout on all the socials. You can also check us out on Facebook, and that's on our link tree as well. So you know what? Just go to the link tree. That's the safest bit. And I will make sure that I post the link tree down in the notes. Also in the show notes are going to be the sources as well for this Sidebar. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. I appreciate you, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for showing up for jury duty. Bye, everybody.